Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to join you all this morning. But I have to be very honest. It is very difficult to follow Johan Rockström because if our ears and eyes are open to what he's saying, he is showing us in one graph after another that we are witnessing and we are collectively responsible for bringing about the death of the living planet on which we all depend. That is the process that we are undertaking in every graph he's showing us. So it makes me want to sit in silence and consider myself, my nation, the world that I'm part of. But I have 20 minutes, and so I won't sit in silence. I will build upon what he's saying and ask, therefore, what must we do? And since we are focusing on your community in Iceland, today I ask, how can Iceland live within the donut? This donut I'm going to introduce is not something to eat. It is something to make us think differently. But I want to start by recognizing that across the world, the 21st century has begun with repeated crises. From the financial meltdown of 2008, which hit your nation particularly hard, along with many others. We know we are in an era of climate and ecological breakdown, which Johan has just described in such painful detail. There have been massive protests around the world rising up amongst environmental defenders, but 2020 was the most dangerous year in recorded history to be an environmental defender because there's also been a rise in crackdown against protesters. There's been murder, suppression, and police violence back against those who are defending the life support systems of our planet. And then we have all just endured 2 years of COVID lockdown. These crises tell us a lot. They tell us how profoundly we are connected with each other and with the rest of the living world. They show us that their impacts hit with sharp inequalities upon people, inequalities of gender, of race, of wealth and power, inequalities between the global north and the global south. And though these crises are reported differently in the news, I think they are profoundly connected by the fact that they all arise from humanity's systems that presume and pursue endless expansion. A financial system seeking to expand endlessly will end in a meltdown. When we endlessly increase our use of fossil fuels and Earth's resources, we break down the climate and Earth's web of life. When we endlessly expand human settlements into wildlife areas coupled with global flights, we create perfect conditions for zoonotic disease transfer and a global health pandemic. So we must transform. We must move away from the vision that success and progress depends upon endless growth and expansion, because it doesn't. This is destroying us. Instead, we need a new starting point, and that's where the donut comes in. Think of it as a compass for human prosperity in the 21st century. The goal? Leave nobody in the hole in the middle. Leave no one falling short on the essentials of life without food, water, healthcare, housing, political voice, income. These come from the Sustainable Development Goals. So every government in the world agrees that every person in the world has a right to these essentials. Leave no one in the hole. But as we seek to meet people's essential needs, we know we use Earth's resources, we convert land, we use water, we've been using fossil fuels. And so we start to put pressure on life support systems of our planet. And these, of course, around the outside are the very planetary boundaries that Johan has just been speaking of. So the goal is to leave no one in the hole, but don't overshoot the limits. We need to live in that green, safe, and just space for humanity where we can thrive. If this is the goal, we are very far from it now, as all of the red shows. Millions and billions of people worldwide still can't meet the most basic needs of life. They don't have food and water and housing and electricity. They don't have income or political voice. And we are already overshooting multiple planetary boundaries. As you once said, we've been overshooting. We've known we've overshooting on climate change, on converting too much land. We are using too much fertilizer wastefully. We are breaking down the web of life. And then just last week, a system scientist said, and now we are looking at chemical pollution, especially plastics, and we are massively overshooting that too. So this is where we are. This is our selfie of humanity and the living world. When we see this, we can't unsee this. This must be our map, our guide, our sense of progress by which we judge every policy, globally, nationally, and locally. Are we turning this story around? Because this is what our children and their children will judge us for. How do we turn this around? I'm showing you a global story, but of course, most policymaking happens much closer to home, and the story between countries varies hugely. Researchers at Leeds University and my colleague at Donut Economics Action Lab have created these national donuts, downscaling as best as possible with the data we have to look at the difference between nations. And you can see huge differences. Malawi, millions of people falling short on the essential needs. They are not putting pressure on the planet. China, a double whammy of falling short and already an overshoot. We've got Norway, perhaps the closest country to Iceland, because they weren't able to quantify Iceland in this study, doing very well on meeting the essential needs of people, but massively overshooting planetary boundaries, as is Sweden, as is Finland, and the UK, where I come from, and the Netherlands, where I'm sitting. And then United States, even more overshooting planetary boundaries. To me, this diagram says there is not one country in the world that has the right to say we are a developed nation. We are an advanced nation. No, we're not. There is nothing developed or advanced about overshooting the limits of our planet and destroying the prospects of all other people. So I invite everybody to catch yourself whenever you say the word developed countries, because there aren't any. We are all on journeys of transformation, and we are not moving anything like fast enough. So how can we transform? We need to move into this donut from both sides at the same time. How? We must transform the dynamics of our economies. We must make them regenerative by design and distributive by design. Let me say more on this. So we've inherited economies with an industrial design that is linear and degenerative by design. We take Earth's materials, we make them into stuff we want. We use it for a while, often just once, and then we throw it away. And this is what pushes us over planetary boundaries and is running down the planet. We must transform this dynamic into a regenerative design, where resources are not used up, they are used again and again and again, and we restore and repair the damage that we have done so that we start to belong and work with and within the cycles of this living world. What does that look like? Well, I'm sitting in the city of Amsterdam, which has committed to put circularity of resource use at the heart of its strategy, circular construction, so that districts like this one are using materials again and again. Oslo has a car-free city center that's moving fossil fuels out of mobility, but also on the biological, natural systems, regenerative agriculture. As Johan said, agriculture must go from releasing carbon to storing carbon, repairing our relationship to the carbon cycle. And cities, like here in Vancouver, must make us belong again, even in our local ecosystems. There are many, many other ways that we can become regenerative by design. And I invite you to ask yourself and look around, how are we already doing this in Iceland? And what more must we do? We've also inherited economies that can be very divisive by design, through infrastructure, through regulation, through privilege, through power. They capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few. And this is why we see the rise of the global 1%. As Oxfam just reported, over the last couple of years, 10 billionaires in the world have just doubled their wealth while 99% of people have seen their incomes fall. How can we transform this insane dynamic and create economies that are distributive by design so that we ensure that value and opportunity that is created is shared far more equitably with everybody who co-creates it? How can we do this? If we bring our thinking to just the scale of cities. Again, I'm sitting in Amsterdam watching bicycles whiz past in the street outside. In this city, when it comes to mobility, the bike is definitely king. Pedestrians come second. The tram comes third, and cars are last. It is a democratizing, distributive way of making mobility affordable and accessible for all. When we're putting solar panels installed in our city, who owns those solar panels? Is it a multinational corporation extracting the value for its shareholders worldwide and its tax havens who know where? Or is it owned locally by the community so that the value of generating clean energy is reinvested where you are? Social housing, it must be low carbon and it must be affordable. How do we combine the social and the ecological in the cities where we live? And how do we open up employment opportunities to people who have been excluded? In Cleveland, in the US, the local hospital extends opportunities to people living in the nearby neighborhood, bringing women back from maternity leave, bringing people with one conviction, giving them a second chance, equitable chances in the new economy. So we need to be regenerative and distributive by design. Let me bring the focus to your nation, and I invite you to explore this question through the lens of the donut. Can Iceland live in the donut? What would that mean? So we can unroll the donut, open out a space that we can dive inside, and then you can use it to imagine creating the future you want. And it becomes like a canvas for imagining your own possibilities. So here's the question. How can Iceland become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And inside that question are 4 questions. They fall into the 4 squares of this canvas. There are local aspirations for your nation, but also your global responsibilities to the world. So the first question, how can all the people of Iceland thrive? What does that mean? What does it mean to thrive in Iceland? Only you can answer that question, because it's a question for your culture, your place, respecting the diversity of people who are there, ensuring that everybody is over the social foundation and can meet life's needs. How do you do that in your communities? Also, how can Iceland's cities and settlements be as generous as the wildland next door? Nature is generous everywhere. She sequesters carbon. She houses wildlife. She stores water after a storm. She cleans the air. How can we create cities and settlements that aim to be as generous as her through so many ways? And that will make our cities and settlements far more resilient to the climate and impact changes that we already know are built into this system. So these are the local aspirations of place. But we know that every nation, however remote it may be on planet Earth, however small it may think it is, every nation is connected through global supply chains, through global trade rules and relationships to people and planet worldwide. So we also ask, how can Iceland respect the health of the whole planet? Think of the food, the electronics, the clothing, the construction materials that are imported every day into your nation, and then the stream of waste that is exported. That has a global carbon and material footprint. And Iceland, like every high-income country, is overshooting planetary boundaries. So how are you going to reduce your impact on the whole planet? Through transforming your economy to a circular one, through reducing the consumption of material means. And then lastly, think again of those supply chains and think of the people. Think of the people in all those supply chains who make the clothes, who pick the food, who dig the materials. How do we respect their rights too? These are the 4 lenses of what we call diving into the unrolled donut. And we have been exploring these with cities and regions worldwide. We began in 2019 with Amsterdam, where I am today, in Portland and in Philadelphia in the US. Policymakers from across the cities said this is so valuable to sit together and to recognize how all of our roles are interconnected. Everything is connected. We must come up with policies that see the holistic connections between things, that make a social just transition as well as an ecological one. We've worked particularly in Amsterdam to create a city portrait through those 4 lenses. They have turned this into a vision for a circular strategy to be a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while respecting the planetary boundaries. And then put this at the heart of their circular policy, 100% circular by 2050, 50% circular by 2030, and 10% circular government procurement from this year. This is the beginning of a strategy of transformation, and now they must do it. They're starting in clothing and textiles, in food and in procurement. Other cities across Europe, across the world, need to follow this scale of ambition. Nanaimo in Canada, inspired by Amsterdam, took the concept of the donut, turned it into their own tool, and have started using it in local planning processes, comparing different options for mobility futures. How do they each impact on the donut? Is it socially just? Is it ecologically sound? How shall we move forward? Using this as a guide for reimagining and remaking the future. I'm talking at city scale, but actually even at the neighborhood scale, people are doing incredible work. An organization called Civic Square in Birmingham in the UK are using this very same framework to explore at the level of a neighborhood. How do we transform these streets? How do we help every resident here understand our interconnectedness with the world? So this tool can be used nationally, city level, even locally. It gets kids involved. It makes everybody start to understand how we can all be part of transforming our economies. So let me finish. This, to me, this donut is the vision of human flourishing in the 21st century. And economic success is only success if it's contributing to this goal. That must be the vision of what we judge our economies by, our financial systems, our industries, our policies. We need to transform dynamics from degenerative industry and financing degenerative industry to financing regenerative industry, from divisive designs to distributive designs. So I invite you in every breakout session, in every panel discussion that follows this, hold these as the judges of the policies and the propositions you're hearing. Are we moving to regenerative? Are we moving to distributive? If we're not, why would we be doing this? And how can we move much faster? And I invite you to explore Iceland's own future through these 4 lenses of the donut. We are going to be releasing the tools of this 4-lens exploration very soon. And I hope it will be useful in your own journey of transformation. So let me finish by saying, if you're interested in the ideas I've been sharing, I invite you to check out what's happening at Donut Economics Action Lab. There's our web address. You can browse the tools, see what other people are making and contributing, because I believe the transformation we all need to make, we will only make by learning from each other and learning fast and sharing openly, because this is what it takes for the speed and scale of transformation that we know these times demand. Thank you very much.